Evergreen Heart. By Oprian. Chapter 15. Unless your life is on the line. With the sound of several small bells, the ornate little clock on the desk struck noon, earning a frustrated groan from its owner. Luna couldn't sleep. She tried meditating, counting sheep, she even had one of her maids bring her warm milk. Never mind the fact she disliked milk at the best of times. But no matter what she did or how hard she tried, sleep just wouldn't come. She had been trying since sunrise. Short of blasting herself with a sleeping hex, she was out of options. She paced her room in frustration for several moments before she decided to head downstairs. Rather than walk down from her tower, she ran out her balcony doors and leapt over the edge, gracefully soaring down whilst leaving behind the faintest trail of stars that sparkled briefly before vanishing into nothingness. She briefly reveled in the feeling of the air whipping past her face and through her mane. It was one of the things she missed most during her 1000-year banishment. She opened her wings fully and let the air currents catch her. Gliding gracefully across the courtyard, she aimed towards the outer wall of the throne room. Just before she collided with the stone, she did a short-range teleport, also known as a blink spell, and ended up inside the throne room itself. With a mighty flap of her wings, she halted her momentum and came to a graceful stop, touching down on the marble floor with barely a sound. "Tia? Are you here?" she called out upon finding the throne itself empty. "Aunt Celestia has gone to witness the trial onto Luna." She left in disguise with two of her guards. A familiar voice called out to her. She turned to find Prince Blueblood standing there. Of course, the trial was today. How could she have forgotten? "Should you not be resting, Aunt Luna? We have tried. Sleep is proving to be especially elusive today," she grumbled. "Any idea why? If we did, we would not be standing here talking to thee. We would be in our bed, asleep." A moment of uncomfortable silence hung between them. "We apologize, we did not mean to be snippy with thee, nephew." Luna suddenly blurted out, not quite meeting Blueblood's eyes. "It's quite all right, Auntie. I understand you have been under a lot of stress. With everything that has happened to you in such a short amount of time, it's no wonder you're having trouble sleeping," Blueblood said whilst waving a hoof dismissively. "Thank you, Blueblood, for being so understanding. Weren't you going to the trial with Aunt Celestia though?" "Nay, we decided not to. We still feel rather uncomfortable in large crowds of ponies. Even while disguised, we feel as if they stare at us, judging us with their eyes," she trailed off. Another silence that dragged out for a minute or so. "Art thou not going to the trial?" Luna finally asked awkwardly, grasping for any topic of conversation. Blueblood shook his head. "I would hate to draw attention to myself. I fear I am not as practiced at disguise spells as Aunt Celestia, or you. And my coltish good looks do tend to turn a few heads," he said, flashing Luna a winning smile while running a hoof through his mane and striking a haughty pose like so many nobles. That last bit made the princess crack a smile at least. "How come thou hast no mere friend yet with such a winning smile?" Blueblood blushed and coughed into a hoof. "I have my reasons, Auntie Luna." Another pause, but this time there was no awkwardness to it. "Still, we are surprised thou hast chosen to remain here. We would have thought thou would want to know how things fared at least. I have faith in Ironclad's skills. He may be far from the most orthodox lawyer, but he knows his laws and how to work the judges. Besides, as we discussed the other day, this trial is little more than a farce for the masses. Just some of the nobility throwing their weight around. Yet what they hope to gain by putting on this spectacle is beyond me." Luna pondered the question for several moments. "If I were orchestrating such events, I would use it to draw away attention from elsewhere. Put on a great spectacle to draw everybody's eye away from the real prize. The trial certainly has done that. Not only that, but it has taken a large portion of our guards to maintain order and security, leaving less of them free to respond to whatever situations might arise. Are there any big events happening in the next few days? Political decisions to be made? Anything like that? None as far as I know. I would have to look into it. One of the large double doors to the throne room creaked as it opened and a very nervous maid stuck her head inside the room. "A thousand pardons, Princess Luna, but there are some ponies here that wish to see you," she said with a tremor in her voice. Meanwhile at the Hall of Justice, it took a solid minute of hoof banging and the threat of having the room forcibly cleared to restore order. It was decided to leave the decision whether or not they would change the charge from murder to being slaughter until the end of the trial. The decision would be pending a lot on the verdict of the other charges, which we now moved on to. First up was the use of forbidden magics. The prosecutor took over and called in his first expert witness, who turned out to be none other than Twilight Sparkle. She looked slightly nervous as she took the witness stand. Probably because she was still fresh out of living as a bookish recluse and now found herself having to address all these ponies. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor ordered. "Twilight Sparkle," she answered with only the faintest trace of a stutter. "Miss Sparkle, you are the protégée of our beloved Princess Celestia, correct?" "Yes, that is correct. And under her tutelage you have studied magic extensively. Would you consider yourself an expert?" She gently coughed into a hoof to clear her throat before she answered. "While I could use more practical experience, I am well versed in magical theory, thaumaturgy, arithmancy, and I know the full schools of magic compendium by heart." "So, without meaning to sound arrogant, that would be a yes," she said with a modest hint of pride. Her nerves now fully under control. "Since you are obviously knowledgeable, you must also know which schools or forms of magic are forbidden from being practiced without a license or altogether." "That I do," she answered crisply. "Could you name those schools of magic that are forbidden for us?" "Those would be necromancy," she said to a slight gasp of disgust from the crowd, "which is one of the completely forbidden schools for obvious reasons. Invocation magic, which has been outlawed after several incidents involving the summoning of minor demons and other evil spirits." Twilight was in full lecture mode now. "Next there is biothaumaturgy, which requires a healer's license and can only be used by trained doctors and nurses, since this school of magic includes some of the most advanced medical spells known to us. Next we have apportation, or transport magic if you will, such as teleportation, which requires a license and being registered with the guard, since it's relatively easy for a pony trained in teleportation to enter, say, a bank vault. I myself am licensed and registered with the Apportation Bureau. Lastly there is wild or feral magic. And chaos magic. Feral magic is forbidden because it is very hard to control and incredibly unpredictable, much like chaos magic. It works on instinct or intent rather than via a structured spell matrix like most schools of magic, and its effects can be very destructive should the caster lose focus or control of the spell. Feral magic is also susceptible to wild surges since it draws power from its surroundings as well as the spellcaster's own mana pool. Should someone use a wild spell in a magically saturated environment, the chances of the spell surging would rise exponentially. Only a hoofful of highly trained researchers are allowed to experiment with it, and never without supervision. As for chaos magic is simply beyond any pony's control. Even Starswirl the Bearded, greatest pony magister of all time, could not bend it to his will. As Twilight's lecture ended, the glazed look that had descended over the eyes of several ponies, including two of the judges, seemed to evaporate. Several more in the public gallery awoke from their impromptu naps with startled snores, looking around bewildered before realizing where they were and composing themselves. "Thank you, Miss Sparkle, for that thorough explanation," the prosecutor said after clearing his throat. "My pleasure," she said with a beaming smile. "Now then, Miss Sparkle, I understand you personally witnessed the attack by the defendant on Ponyville." "Witnessed would be putting it lightly, but yes, that is correct," she said whilst looking in my direction. Her stare, while not hateful, was far from friendly. "You also examined the defendant after the event, correct?" "Yes, though I was unaware I was dealing with a sentient creature at the time. I was under the impression we were dealing with a case of possessed flora. Much like with the timber wolves." Putting that aside for the moment, when you performed your examination, did you also do a standard thaumaturgy test to determine the type of magic involved? Yes, but the first results were inconclusive. I had to resort to more invasive methods to draw a definitive conclusion. And what was this conclusion, Miss Sparkle? What sort of magical signature did you find on the suspect? All test results showed that the base magical signature of the subject were feral in origin. Thank you, Miss Sparkle, the prosecutor said before turning to face the judges. There it is, Your Honors. According to Miss Sparkle's expert opinion, it was clearly feral magic. Her findings have since been confirmed by the researchers at the Archmagos laboratory. This is a magic that, as stated, is forbidden by equestrian law, Your Honors. It is therefore clear that the defendant is guilty and should be punished accordingly. Your Honors, the prosecution rests. There was murmuring among the crowd and the judges themselves for a moment before Lord Grimoire addressed Ironclad case. Even though this case seems rather clear-cut, would the defense like to cross-examine the witness? That I would, Your Honor. Ironclad boomed. You may proceed. Jade Gale said. Ironclad picked up one of the file folders on the table and rose from his seat to approach the witness stand. Miss Sparkle, you are clearly well versed in the rules and regulations. I would like to think so. I am an A+ student after all. And yet you took it upon yourself to perform these tests on my client without proper authorization. Since according to the file I have here you are not a licensed researcher. What? Yes, I am. Apologies, it says here you are indeed licensed as a theoretical spellcraft researcher and alchemist. I told you. Twilight began, but Ironclad interrupted her. However, you are not licensed to perform magical and biological experiments on sentient beings. And certainly not without their consent. Like I said, I was unaware at the time. I thought we were dealing with a plant, not whatever he truly is. I still haven't figured that out, she said, sounding a bit abashed. Ignorance is no excuse, Miss Sparkle. The fact is you performed experiments on my client without proper authorization. As such, I motion for the court to declare her findings as inadmissible as evidence. Objection. The prosecutor shouted. But I did have authorization. Twilight shouted before the judges could respond. Princess Celestia herself authorized it. That caused a bit of a stir with the crowd. No doubt the rumor mill would be working overtime today. Do you have proof of this, Miss Sparkle? Asked Willowvine. I have a writ from the princess granting me the authority to perform all necessary tests to determine the origins of the entity that attacked Ponyville. Show us, please. With a flash from her horn, Twilight summoned a scroll and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judges. They scrutinized it for several moments. Finally Lord Grimoire performed a spell on the scroll. It lit up with a green glow. This document is indeed authentic. Objection sustained, he said. Do you have any further questions, counselor? A sudden thought struck me and I motioned Ironclad over to the table. After a brief discussion he gave me a grin and turned back to face the bench. Your Honors, my client has just pointed out an error with this charge. Oh, said Jade Gale. Indeed. He said before addressing Twilight again, Miss Sparkle, you said feral magic is one of the forbidden schools. Yes. I thought I made that clear, she answered with a hint of frustration. So who exactly is forbidden from practicing them? Why, ponies, of course. Exactly. Ponies. Ironclad said loudly. But as we already established earlier, my client is not a pony. Thus this rule does not apply to him. You are in error, sir. This law applies to every citizen of Equestria. That includes non-ponies. Willowvine stated. I stand corrected, Your Honor, however my client is not a citizen of Equestria. Furthermore, there are places in Equus where the practice of necromancy, for example, is allowed as part of sacred burial rites. Now if one of these practitioners visits Equestria, they aren't immediately arrested and tried, are they? You know full well they are not. Jade Gale said. Then by that logic my client should fall under the same exemption for feral magics. Let us not even get into the fact that it is these very same magics that form the core of my client's very being, and to deny him the use and access to them would be akin to a death sentence. Silence was the only answer we got. It took the judges 15 minutes of heated debate to come to a consensus this time. They did not look very happy as they rendered their verdict. On the charge of using forbidden magics we find the defendant not guilty. Be warned, you are getting off on a technicality. Any further provocation on your part will see you back in this court, and then you will be found guilty and sentenced accordingly. My relief was short-lived as the public gallery once more erupted into shouts. This trial is a farce, yelled one pony. Where is the justice here, shouted another. The more it happened, the more I became convinced that every time the crowd erupted into unrest it was the same couple of ponies that stoked the proverbial fires. You are certain she is here, one pony whispered to another as the crowd was shouting for justice. According to our sources, she is attending this trial in disguise with only minimal protection. Stay alert. If we cannot find her, we can at least take care of her protégé. A third pony whispered. Yes, that will do nicely. And it will surely draw her out, said the first. What is the meaning of this? How did thou gain entry to the palace? Luna demanded as the maid was led into the room at knife point by a half-dozen unicorns dressed in black. They immediately closed off the room and cast a locking spell on the door and silencing spell across the room itself. No pony outside would hear them. We have come for you, Mistress Moon, the leader of the group said as he bowed to her. We have come to free you from this gilded prison so we may restore you to your rightful place as the true ruler of Equestria. Your loyal agents are everywhere. Our families have waited generations for your return. Luna's eyes had turned to saucers while her pupils shrank to pinpricks. Thou cannot be serious. She stammered. The leader of the group looked up confused. Mistress. We have just returned from our banishment. We have barely recovered from our ordeal. And thou wantest us to follow thee and lead a revolt anew against mine sister's throne? To revel in the darkness, and the suffering of the peasantry? I say thee nay. We would be back on the moon before we could blink our eyes. We will not go back to that lonely desolate void. Never again. The leader's shoulders sagged slightly. So the rumors were true. The elements have poisoned your mind. They have shackled our mistress, and in her place we have you. The meek princess who lets her sister, the false servant of the sun, define her boundaries. Luna bristled at his words. Were she at her full potential she would have struck him down without batting an eye. But she could not. Not now. Especially with one of them holding a blade to one of the palace maids. She searched for a retort, but before she could form one the unknown pony drew a silver scimitar. If you will not come with us willingly we will take you by force and we will find a way to free our beloved mistress from whatever mental prison you are keeping her in. Over my cold dead body. Blue Blood said as his horn lit up. A quick summoning spell, later a rapier materialized in his magical grip as he took up a defensive stance between Luna and the cultists. Nephew, nay, they have a hostage and they outnumber thee. Thou cannot handle them all by thyself. He won't have to, a warm, almost musical voice said as another pony seemingly materialized out of thin air. She was a tall female thestral with a deep midnight blue coat and long flowing mane in subtle shades of violet, teal green, and blue. She spread her wings wide, showing off the deadly razor-edged blades affixed to their length. Her stance was loose and relaxed, but her golden yellow eyes had an edge of steel to them. Traitor! The leader of the group spat at her. You should be on our side. You Thestrals should be helping us restore our mistress to glory. The days of the Nightmare Kingdom have passed. Princess Luna wants nothing to do with you and your cult. A cult that should have been rooted out long ago. For the princess' sake I will see it done. Now surrender. Surrender? You are outnumbered 3-1. The leader said as two of his flunkies took up flanking positions. The mare's lips curled into a slight smirk before she suddenly sprang forward faster than a heavy crossbow bolt, leaving a shimmering trail the color of her mane behind her. She dashed in between the two ponies trying to flank her. Her wing flashed once before she came to a full stop, slamming her hooves into the floor. One of the ponies who had tried to flank her trembled slightly, before he collapsed screaming to the ground. The tendons of both his gaskin and elbow on his left side severed in one masterful strike. He would not be getting up again without assistance. The mare slowly turned to look at the leader, giving him a sultry look. 2-1 she hummed. Things were not going well. The trial had moved on to the charges of assault and destruction of property. They called up half a dozen ponies who witnessed the attack. Each of them telling their own version of how the horrible living mass of floral death had attacked the town and injured someone they knew, tore down a couple of buildings, and somehow set fire to others. Even if the situation was only half as bad as they made it out to be, it still made my stomach lurch. Well, not literally, since I don't exactly have a stomach, but you know what I mean. Then at last they called me to the stand. After having to sit quietly through this whole song and dance for the last couple of hours, I was getting restless and more than eager to give them a piece of my mind. The prosecutor approached me with a condescending sneer on his face. "State your name for the record." "Aaron. Is that your full name?" I really disliked this guy. He used so much of that "I'm better than you" smugness. I was surprised he didn't leave a snail trail wherever he went, the slimy git. He's the kind of person you want to smack upside the head simply on principle, because he's a walking offense against common decency. It's the only one I care to give. Besides, there is no way for you to confirm it either which way. I could call myself Lord of the Thundercats, and you wouldn't know if it were actually true or not. "Mr. Aaron, kindly behave yourself," Lord Grimoire said. "My apologies, Your Honor. By the way, could you ask the prosecutor to wipe that look he's giving me off his face? It's bugging the hell out of me and making me snippy." "That's enough, Mr. Aaron." Willowvine spat, "We will not have you turn these proceedings into a circus. Sheesh, that mare is a hardass. Now then, Mr. Aaron, would you perhaps like to share with us exactly why you attacked the little town of Ponyville? Would it help if I said no?" "Mr. Aaron. Mr. Prosecutor, as I told Princess Celestia, I did not attack Ponyville. That was done by the beast." "Ah yes, this nameless beast that you claim took control of your body and went on a killing spree." "That's right. Do you take us for fools, Mr. Aaron? You personally or ponies in general?" "Mr. Aaron. I withdraw the question, Your Honor. I just couldn't help myself." This guy's face just brought out the smartass in me. I could see Ironclad motioning for me to cut out the horseshit whilst simultaneously trying to stifle a grin. "No, Mr. Prosecutor, I do not take ponies for fools. I know for a fact that most of you can be very reasonable creatures once you get past your knee-jerk flight instincts. And no, that was not an underhanded insult. Merely an outsider's observation. If that is so, then why do you spin these elaborate lies? It is not a lie. You expect us to believe that you were somehow taken over, or possessed if you will, by an evil spirit that made you do these horrible things." "Yes, because that is exactly what happened." I then retold the story once again. How I confronted the dragon, how we came to blows, and how I managed to overcome it before losing control. The fact that the prosecutor scoffed at every other sentence I uttered did nothing to improve my disposition. Fabrications. Fabrications cooked up by a dangerous criminal being who's trying to escape punishment. There's no such thing as possessions, the prosecutor practically spat once I was done with my story. Objection. Ironclad bellowed whilst pointing a finger at the prosecutor. His volume was so loud Jade Gale actually fell backwards off his chair. A few loose feathers flying upwards as he impacted the floor with an audible thud. "Your own expert, Miss Sparkle, actually mentioned possessed flora. Are you now saying your expert is wrong?" "Of course not. So then you agree possession must be a real thing?" "I would have to ask Miss Sparkle to clarify the details." "Miss Sparkle, would you kindly step up to the bench and clarify a few details for us?" Lord Grimoire asked as a slightly bruised Jade Gale climbed back into his seat. Certainly. Twilight said and stood up from her seat to approach the bench. Miss Sparkle, you mentioned possessed flora earlier. So according to your expertise, possession is indeed possible? Ironclad asked. Well, there are prime examples of spirits, both malicious and benign, manifesting themselves by taking control of vegetation among other things. However, all these recorded incidents show the subjects possessing dead wood. Never has there been a confirmed sighting of a spirit possessing a living host. Timber wolves are a prime example, though ponies often mistake them for elementals. Thank you, Miss Sparkle, the prosecutor interrupted her before she could start another lecture. I would like to point out that Miss Sparkle said that possessions only happen with dead wood. You don't strike me as all that dead, Mr. Aaron. Objection. Miss Sparkle stated there have been no recorded cases of a living host being possessed. Semantics. The prosecutor countered, Your Honors, we could debate this point until we are blue in the face. But the fact is there isn't a shred of proof that this alleged possession took place. The judge looked at each other briefly before Jade Gale spoke. Counselor, do you have anything further for us? Ironclad turned to me with a look of defeat. We were at the end of our rope here and it would take a miracle to turn this around now. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened to admit a couple of familiar and most welcome faces. In the lead was none other than Zekora, accompanied by a unicorn stallion I didn't recognize. Trailing behind them were the cutie mark Crusaders. I guess Lady Fate decided to take pity on me. Which immediately made me paranoid about what sort of crap she was holding back to fling at me later. Yet I'm the paranoid type. Whenever things go my way I can't help but wonder what kind of disaster is waiting in the wings. Anyway, Zekora and the unknown stallion walked up to Ironclad and had a brief quiet conversation before Ironclad addressed the judges once again. Your Honors, I have just been told there is an eyewitness who also happens to be an expert on spirits and other supernatural phenomena. I object, this witness was not on the approved list. The prosecutor shouted. Overruled, I am eager to hear what this witness has to say. Willowvine replied. Zekora gingerly walked up to the witness stand to take her seat. I'm glad you're safe. I whispered to her as we passed by each other. She gave me a gentle smile as she sat down. Please state your name, ma'am. Willowvine said. Zekora is the name by which I am known. The Everfree Forest has long been my home. It is rare that we see zebra this far north. What has brought you to Equestria? The Everfree is rich in herbs that I require to ply my trade. If you require a potion for what ails you, I can have it made. You are an alchemist. Herbalist, alchemist, healer, and spiritual guide, these are the skills to which myself I have applied. Spiritual guide? Lord Grimoire asked with a hint of skepticism. In my homeland, as a shaman I was trained, and over the years a lot of knowledge I have gained. I was young with much curiosity to sate, thus with spirits I learned to communicate. Through trance and ritual, with the spirit world I can speak. With their help I find the knowledge that I seek. Using what wisdom I learned I guide others on the path of life, so they find fulfillment and avoid the way of strife. And how do you know the defendant? We met by chance, when he crossed my path, lost and alone. For a time I took him into my home. You lived with this monster? The prosecutor blurted out. He's not a monster. Applebloom practically growled at the prosecutor before the unknown stallion sitting beside the CMC gently shushed her. Order in the court. Willowvine said with a rap of her hoof, Please continue, Miss Zekora. Zekora nodded before she resumed her tale. With me for a time he did reside, and much I learned of who he is inside. Now his freedom is what I must defend, for he is with certainty innocent. Over the next couple of minutes Zekora explained as clearly as she could what had happened to me in so far as the beast was concerned. She explained how a spirit could find ways to hide in a person's subconscious in order to survive on the mortal plane, and influence them in such a way that it gave them nourishment, for lack of a better term, to regain strength. and how that could eventually lead to the spirit taking control. They once more asked Twilight for her opinion on the matter, but she could do little more than defer to Zakora's greater knowledge on the subject. She did confirm that the amount of free-floating dark magic of the Everfree could accelerate the process, and that my calling upon that magic in order to fight the dragon on equal terms would certainly have done so. I must admit that my mind kind of zoned out for several minutes at this point as the debate continued. My eyes drifted to the public gallery. When my eyes met Apple Bloom, she gave me an encouraging little wave with her hoof. Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle were a little more reserved. Both were looking at me with uncertainty and curiosity. Well, it was a step up from fear at least. The unknown stallion, who I later learned was called Starhorn, gave me a mostly neutral expression and a brief nod. As I looked at the rest of the gallery, I noticed a white unicorn with a bright pink mane not unlike Pinky's staring at me intently. She seemed familiar, yet I was sure I had never met her before, nor seen her on the show. I had no time to contemplate this further as my attention was called back to the proceedings. It seemed the debate was over and the judges had reached a verdict. It was Lady Willowvine who once again took charge. On the charges of assault and destruction of property we find the defendant not guilty. Before the crowd could descend into an angry mob again, she continued. However, there remains the charge of murder. At this point Jade Gale took over. Based on the evidence presented during this trial, and the testimonies of these witnesses, we have agreed to change the charges from murder to involuntary being slaughter. Mr. Aaron, Lord Grimoire now continued, we believe you to be an entity capable of reason. Your behavior in this court today certainly proves you are not so different from the common pony. Though you are a bit of a smart plot. A few quiet chuckles from the CMC could be heard at that last remark. Based on what we of the tribunal have observed, we do not believe that killing other beings is typical everyday behavior for you. Without eyewitnesses or any other solid proof to the contrary, and considering you confessed to the crime of your own free will while having no reason to do so, we of this tribunal therefore see no other alternative but to take you at your word that the death of the dragon, while most unfortunate, was accidental as a result of self-defense. Willowvine once more took over. However, since the killing of other beings is such a serious, and fortunately extremely rare crime in Equestria, we feel it necessary to make an example in order to discourage such incidents from occurring. We therefore apply the maximum penalty and sentence you to 16 months in the palace dungeon. Sentence is to be carried out immediately. This trial is concluded. She finished with one loud stomp of her hoof on the sounding board. I was given 5 minutes to say my goodbyes. The first thing I did was walk over to Zakora and unceremoniously pulled her into a hug, much to the amusement of the CMC. Even the disapproving mutterings of the crowd seemed like little more than the distant buzzing of an annoying fly. Thank you, my friend, for coming all this way to speak on my behalf. I owe you a great debt. You can repay it fair, by letting me have some precious air. She wheezed and I sheepishly loosened my grip. She then introduced me to Starhorn, who had been kind enough to help her and the CMC get here in time. Then Ironclad came over to say his goodbyes. As I shook hands with him, the white unicorn that had been staring at me earlier approached us, and then transformed into none other than Celestia herself. Half the room scrambled to bow with such speed I was amazed they didn't smash their jaws into the floor. She was then beset by an excited lavender blur, better known as Twilight Sparkle. After the two exchanged greetings, Celestia turned to speak with me. It seems everything went as well as could be expected, she said. Traveling incognito today, princess? I asked. Had I been observing things officially, it would have been a very different affair. Some ponies tend to get a bit worked up when I am present, she said with a mirthful glance at Twilight, who had quite the blush on her face. Your disguise seems a little obvious in retrospect. Maybe next time try for something that isn't white and pink. Said Celestia, I always did want to experiment with turquoise. I guess I misjudged you. Twilight said to me now that she had her embarrassment under control. She still seemed rather uneasy around me, but Celestia's presence was putting her at ease. Just don't go slicing off any more parts of me, all right? You have no idea how much that hurt. I'm sorry, she said, rubbing a hoof across the back of her head. It was only a small bit though. By way of answer I leaned forward and then casually flicked her hard in the horn with a finger. This produced a startled yelp of pain from her. Ow! What was that for? It was only a little tap, I said as casually as possible. She gave me the stink eye for a minute before she relented. I guess you made your point, she said while rubbing her horn with a gentle hoof. Are we good? Yes, Twilight, I said whilst extending a fist for her to hoof bump, we're good. One of my guard escorts stepped forward with a pair of hoof cuffs. It's time to go, he said not unkindly. I was about to reply when the room descended into chaos. A trio of unicorns seated in the back jumped up and set off what I assume were smoke bombs. The next thing I knew, they emerged from the smoke dressed like a bunch of pony ninja. The smoke bombs turned out to be some sort of riot gas because any pony else caught in it began coughing and screaming that their eyes and nose were burning. Death to the servants of the sun, one pony ninja bellowed. I recognized him as one of the voices that kept riling the crowd anytime the trial went in my favor. Their horns glowed and a barrage of lethal-looking daggers came sailing towards Celestia. Her two bodyguards jumped in front of her and raised a pair of magic force fields, the daggers harmlessly bouncing against them. But not every dagger was aimed at Celestia. At least a few were aimed at Twilight. What happened next was a blur. One moment those ponies charged, the next they were crushed against the wall by a mass of writhing vines. The daggers that would have struck Twilight were now embedded in my own chest, and Twilight herself was lying dazed on the floor beside me. She looked up at me with slightly panicked eyes. In a flash Celestia was beside her, checking her for injuries. Starhorn and Ironclad had covered Zekora and the CMC. Ironclad had put himself in the line of fire in front of Zekora, and Starhorn had erected a force dome over the three fillies. I stood rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of what just happened. Celestia's two bodyguards took up position between her and me. "Don't move," one shouted at me. "Have you lost your mind, Emerald Aegis?" Celestia almost growled. "He just saved Twilight's life. Make yourself useful and restrain those unicorns." As her guards rushed to comply to her orders, she turned to address me. "Aaron, let them go, please." I nodded and withdrew my vines. The unicorns slumped to the floor. They were alive but in pretty poor shape. They likely had several broken bones judging by the indentation they had left in the wall. "Are you alright?" a small voice beside me asked. I turned to see Applebloom, Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle look up at me. "What?" I asked, dumbstruck. "Ah," said, "doesn't that hurt?" Applebloom asked whilst pointing a hoof at my chest. I looked down at the daggers, counting them for the first time. There were 5 in all. I shrugged, "Can't feel a thing." I then began pulling out the first one and tossed it carefully to the floor. "Wicked," Scootaloo whispered. Over the next couple of minutes the windows were opened and spells were cast to air out the riot gas. A squad of medics had appeared. They set up a triage area in the hallway to administer first aid, mainly washing out eyes and performing minor healing spells to whichever ponies had trouble breathing. The 3 cultists were given the minimum of first aid before they were hastily taken away, presumably to be treated in a secure location, and then questioned. Things finally seemed to wind down when another guard, a Pegasus, came barreling down the hallway, calling for Celestia. "Princess, Princess, there has been an attack on the palace." "What?" Several of the windows cracked as Celestia slipped into the royal cantorlet voice. Several armed individuals managed to get past gate security. They had help from someone on the inside. They took a hoof maiden hostage and barricaded themselves in the throne room. "What about my sister? How is Luna?" "She's fine, Your Highness, but your nephew," the guard trailed off. "What is it? What happened to Blue Blood?" With a fierce battle cry the cultists jumped to the attack. The leader and his hench pony attacked the Thestral mare while 2 others went after Blue Blood. The last one held on to the maid and told Luna not to interfere with her magic or he would cut the maid's throat. The hench pony leapt forward, sickles raised, and lashed out with a series of rapid strikes, his weapons swinging in deadly arcs. The mare ducked under the left strike and parried the right with a wing blade. With a quick thrust of her wings she propelled herself forward, inside the unicorn's guard to deliver a fierce headbutt directly to his horn. With a yelp of pain the pony's magical aura fizzled out, his weapons dropping to the floor with a clatter. A follow-up buck to the stomach put him out of the fight for a while as he lay there retching and dry heaving. On the other side of the throne room, Blue Blood swung his rapier in a wide arc in front of him to keep his opponents at a distance. One was wielding a wicked axe, the other levitated a quartet of daggers. The axe pony swung his weapon in an overhead strike, attempting to deliver a single cleaving blow. Blue Blood sidestepped the much slower, heavier weapon easily, and the only damage done was to the floor of the throne room as the axe split one of the immaculate marble floor tiles clean in half. Ducking past his slower opponent, he delivered a swift buck into the stallion's head, staggering him. A telekinetic slam saw his opponent sail into a wall and rendered unconscious. He then had to duck sideways quickly as a pair of daggers sailed through the air in a series of rapid jabs, cuts and thrusts. With his rapier leading, Blue Blood took a couple of steps forward, each step punctuated by a fierce thrust with the weapon's needle-like point. His opponent had to leap back rapidly to avoid being skewered by the rapier's greater reach. They danced around each other, blades flying in a deadly dance of parries and thrusts. Blue Blood met every dagger strike with a skillful riposte. "You're not half bad for a spoiled rich kid," the dagger-wielding unicorn growled in between strikes. "But let's see you handle this." His horn glowed brighter, and 6 additional daggers flew out of his cloak. He shot them at Blue Blood like a salvo of razor-edged missiles. Blue Blood parried the first, ducked under the second, then sidestepped the third. The 4th dagger missed his head by a hair. A desperate upward stroke deflected the 5th. Then the 6th one cut his cheek. A small trickle of blood ran from the wound and down his muzzle before dripping onto the floor. He pressed a hoof to his face to examine the wound. It was shallow but bled profusely as wounds to the face tend to do. "What the matter, rich boy? Sad that I nicked your pretty face?" the stallion taunted. "Scared that all the mares at your fancy parties won't like you now? You have much more to worry about." Blue Blood let out an angry, determined snort as he raised his weapon again. "Just because I happen to share the same family tree as the princesses and am therefore given the title of prince doesn't mean I'm some spoiled rich brat who cares more for his looks than the well-being of the common pony. And just to prove I'm not above getting my hooves dirty, I'm going to give you a right thrashing. You talk a big game, boy. But I've learned to fight in the back alleys of Manhattan." With a fierce lunge Blue Blood shot forward, his rapier leading the way. With a ripping sound and a flourish the cloak on the cultist fell away, its clasps cut off. A thin line of blood now decorated the stallion's neck where the blade had nicked his skin. Blue Blood looked at him with a smirk. "I studied the art of fencing since I was a colt." His opponent's eyes narrowed as he let out a snarl. Back on the other side of the room the leader was continuing his deadly dance with the Thestral mare. The flunky she disabled earlier finally managed to crawl back to his hooves and went to pick up his lost sickles while she fought the leader to a near standstill. He was a deft hoof with his scimitar, but she had the superior speed and agility. Their weapons flashed in silver arcs as they spun around each other like some insane ballet of death. "You are pretty good girl, tell me your name so I can write you a proper epitaph," he taunted as he struck a blow across her chest that she didn't manage to dodge. As she took a staggering step back his lips curled into a smile of triumph, figuring he had delivered a killing blow. His triumphant smile faltered as he realized there was no blood on his blade. Her petrol armor had taken the blow and merely winded her for a second. Using the opening provided by the stallion's momentary distraction she jumped up and spun like a top, whipping her wings outward. A trio of projectiles shot from her wings and thudded into his chest and leg. He looked down to see 3 slim knives, shaped like feathers protruding from his flesh. Then the pain hit him and he went down screaming. When you beg me for mercy later, during the questioning, you may call me Miss Aurora, she whispered in his ear with a downright sadistic smile of glee. A thunderous right hoof knocked him out for the count before he could say anything else. The flunky who finally retrieved his weapons was looking at her with uncertainty. She sauntered up to him, cracking her neck in a slow deliberate motion. Ready for round 2, stud? I have some more pent-up aggression to work out, she hummed as she cracked her wings loudly and dropped into a ready stance. Blue Blood was trading a flurry of blows with his opponent. He gave as good as he got, but the dagger-wielding unicorn was using every dirty trick in the book to try and gain the upper hand. Daggers met rapier in showers of fat sparks as their weapons clashed and scraped against each other. The fast-paced clang and scrape of steel against steel rang out like a bizarre musical number. Blue Blood leapt away from a dagger thrust aimed at his heart and countered with a diagonal upwards stroke. His opponent threw himself backwards and all he caught was a lock of the unicorn's mane that drifted to the floor in a shower of loose hairs. Then suddenly the unicorn fired a spell. A simple magic bolt. Blue Blood barely had time to jump out of the way. The bolt slammed into the throne itself, partially destroying the top. All bets were now off. With a swipe of his own telekinesis, Blue Blood launched several chunks of the rubble at his opponent. Fist-sized chunks of stone and woodwork struck the unicorn in the barrel, knocking the wind out of him. He followed up with the same telekinetic bolt, albeit one with far less power behind it, and blasted the stallion off his hooves. Not letting up, he ran in and delivered a swift hard kick to the cannon. With a sick wet crack and a scream of pain, the stallion's back leg now hung broken by his side, putting him out of the fight for good. No unicorn would be casting any spells with that sort of pain shooting through their mind. Not unless they want to blow off their own horn with the inevitable magical backlash. Behind him there was a thud and another scream as Aurora put her own opponent out of Komi's Zion by pulling the same trick she used as her opening move and sever the offender's tendons. The both of them then turned to the last pony standing. The stallion holding a dagger to the maid's throat. The poor mare was breathing so fast she was on the verge of hyperventilating. "Stay back! Back, you crazy bastards, I will kill her. I swear it by Nightmare Moon, I'll cut her throat. Do it and I will run you through before she hits the floor, scum." Blue Blood snorted. "What's your name, darling?" Aurora asked the mare. She swallowed hard. "P. Primrose. P. please. I don't wanna die," she squeaked as a tear leaked from her eyes. "You're going to be okay, Primrose. Just look at me." "No, she won't unless you two back the buck off," the stallion snarled, pushing the blade against the mare's throat hard enough to draw a thin line of blood. Aurora raised her wings threateningly. "Harm her any further and you will beg to be banished to the moon by the time I'm finished with you." So distracted was he by Aurora that he never saw Blue Blood's horn flare up. He didn't realize something was amiss until the broken piece of throne impacted with his head. The cultist dropped like a stone. He would be lucky if he got off with just a concussion. The knife he had been pressing to Primrose's throat clattered to the floor. Primrose herself nearly fainted, staggering drunkenly on her hooves for a few steps until she fell into her rescuer's waiting hooves. She was shaking like a leaf. "Is she gonna be okay?" Luna asked. "She'll be fine, Auntie," Blue Blood said as he shook his head. There was a strange pounding in his ears and his vision swam in and out of focus. "I see, can T stop T trembling?" Primrose sobbed. "That's just the excess adrenaline in your body, dear," Aurora said in a gentle voice. "In a few minutes you will feel better, promise." Luna slowly stepped up to the shaken mare and cast a calming spell on her. Her attention was drawn back to Blue Blood, who took a staggering couple of steps. Seemingly dazed. "Nephew? Are you all right?" "I don't feel so good." Blue Blood managed to mumble before his legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor. "Blue Blood!" Luna cried out. In a flash both she and Aurora were by his side. With a deft hoof Aurora opened his eye, checking his heart rate with the other. He's been poisoned. Those daggers must have been coated with something. He needs a doctor, now, she said in alarm as blue blood started to foam at the mouth. Scrambling back to her hooves, Luna ran to the doors. She pushed and pulled but they refused to budge. She fired a standard unlocking spell at them but whatever spell their attackers had cast on it refused to budge. In a desperate bid to find help, Luna charged her horn and blew the throne room doors off their hinges with an overpowered telekinetic blast. The two iron-wrought doors bounced along the corridor, wrecking anything in their path before impacting on the far wall. One shattered and the other embedded itself halfway into the stonework. "Get a healer in here. Now," she shouted at the guards who came galloping towards the noise. It wasn't quite the royal Canterlot voice, but it was a close second. She ran back inside and skid to a halt beside Aurora and Blue Blood. "Stay with us, nephew. Stay with us." Later that evening at the Blessed Fields mansion there was a knock on the study door. A maid in a crisp French uniform stepped into the chamber. "Pardon the intrusion, Lady Vine, you have a visitor." "Who is it?" "It's Master Poncho, miss." "Show him in immediately, then see to it that we are not disturbed," she told the maid in a voice that left no room for questions. "At once, miss," the maid said as she bowed deeply. A large dark brown stallion with stern, green eyes and a small, coal-black beard was shown in only moments later. The two exchanged pleasantries until the maid had left and was well out of earshot. The stallion's casual bearing immediately shifted to one that was all business. "Your report, Sitsix," he demanded, his voice was cold as a glacier. "The plan worked perfectly, sir. Those idiotic zealots took the bait hook, line and sinker. And they were swiftly defeated as you foresaw. Of course, those weaklings might have been training to fight all their lives for their glorious cause," he said mockingly, "but no amount of practice can make up for real battlefield experience." "As you say, General." After they were taken away for questioning, the prisoners spilled their guts in no time at all. Already Celestia's forces are rooting out the last of the nightmare cults. By their estimates they will have all of them in custody before the end of the month. Good. With Nightmare Moon truly gone, and her cultists taken out of the picture, that is one less obstacle to the plans. "Pardon me, sir, but would it not have been better to help the cultists and restore Nightmare Moon? The infighting it would cause would only serve to weaken Equestria." Note Sitsix, Nightmare Moon was powerful, utterly ruthless, and extremely unpredictable. She wielded her formidable powers without some idiotic sense of morality holding her back. She would have become an opponent we would be hard-pressed to defeat. Princess Luna, on the other hoof, is centuries out of touch with the world, and now so afraid to step out of line she will be easy to manipulate to our advantage. "As you say, General. But what's to keep the cultists from becoming a nuisance later down the line? Ponies are so soft-hearted I can't imagine their punishment will put them away for too long. While you don't need to know, let me put your mind at ease. Once the last of the cultists are in custody, I've made arrangements to see to it they are dealt with, permanently. When the time comes, nothing will stand in our way." "And the creature, sir?" "It survived the attack. Setting up this whole trial as a distraction was hastily planned and could have backfired spectacularly," she said with uncertainty. "Inconsequential. It has served its unknowing purpose. While using it was a gamble, the risk to our endgame was minimal, and the collateral damage would have been far greater had we employed other methods to give the Nightmare Cult an opening into the palace. This way only a handful of ponies got hurt, and that will benefit us. And as for the creature, by the time our plans come into fruition it will still be in prison. But if through some fluke it is not, and chooses to work against us, we will deal with it." "As you say, sir," she said with a low bow. "Was there anything else?" "That will be all for now, Sitsix. Continue operating as normal. When we have use for you I will make contact through the usual channels." "As you direct, General. Now that business is concluded, bring in that lovely maid of yours. I feel a bit peckish." On the other side of Canterlot, Blue Blood sat in his bed, several pillows propped up behind him. It had been touch and go for a while, but they managed to stabilize him long enough for the palace's resident healer to administer a broad-spectrum antidote. It meant his recovery would take a little longer, but they did not need to waste time identifying the specific type of poison that had been used. He briefly glanced up from the book he loosely held in his hooves to stare out the window. A plate with a half-eaten daisy sandwich sat on the nightstand. He had tried to eat something, but his stomach still felt like it had a live squid wriggling around in it thanks to the antidote. From his room he had a perfect view of the main wing of the palace and its many towers. He caught a glimpse of Luna in the distance as she stood on her balcony. The faint light of her horn like a tiny star against the darkened sky. She had raised the moon an hour ago, but like every night since her return she stood on her balcony and practiced manipulating the heavens in order to strengthen her magic. A quiet knock on his chamber doors made Blue Blood sit up a little straighter in his bed. Putting the book he had been reading aside, he called out, "Enter." "Aunt Celestia, here to make sure I'm still among the living," he said in greeting as the Princess of the Sun trod into his chambers. Without a word she stepped up to his bed and put her forelegs around him in a tight hug. Feeling a touch embarrassed, he gently pat her on the withers with a hoof. "I'm all right, Auntie, really. You could have died today," Celestia said as she released him. "But I didn't, and Dr. Swift Remedy says I'll be right as rain in a day or two thanks to her tender ministrations." "You seem to be taking this all in stride for someone who just survived being poisoned," Celestia said. "It was nothing, Auntie." "Nonsense. You protected my sister and more importantly saved Miss Primrose's life at great risk to your own. What sort of stallion would I be if I let an innocent mare get hurt? Especially such a lovely filly. Better I get hurt instead of her." "Oh," Celestia said with a light chuckle, "do you fancy her?" Blue Blood blushed. "It's nothing like that, Auntie. Yes, she's a very pretty mare, but she is not my type." "Her loss, I'm sure," she said with a teasing little smile. "The day you find a special some pony, a lot of hearts will be broken all over Equestria. I'm sure Cousin Cadence will take care of the poor souls," he said in a haughty, aloof tone, but failed to keep a straight face. Both ponies descended into a brief fit of giggles. After they both recovered, Celestia put a hoof on his shoulder. "Are you absolutely sure you're all right? It's not every day a pony stares death in the face. It can leave them shaken and all too aware of their mortality." "I'll be fine, Auntie. Really. I'll admit the whole thing had me a bit shook up, but Swift Remedy prescribed something to help steady the nerves. I'll be okay." He gave Celestia his most reassuring smile. "If you need anything at all, or just want to talk, I will let you know," he said, still smiling. Satisfied for now, Celestia walked over to the door. "Good night, nephew," she said over her shoulder before closing the door behind her. Blue Blood let out a sigh. A special some pony to snuggle up against would have been very welcome right then. Perhaps when he was fully recovered he should go out and look for one. With a wistful smile, Blue Blood returned to his book. With a metallic clunk that held an edge of finality to it, the cell door closed behind me. It was the same cell I had occupied before the trial. I looked at its bare walls and let out a mental sigh. This would be my new home for the next 16 months. Well, it could have been a whole lot worse. I sat staring at the wall for a time until a wooden thunk pulled me out of my musings. A pair of familiar faces pushed a table up against the bars, and then pulled up some chairs. "What's all this then?" I asked with a bit of levity returning to my voice. "Well, we never got to finish that last game, and I was kicking your flanks," Sunny Spring said. "In you dreams, hot flanks," her grey CO worker said. "I never did get your name," I said. He mumbled something under his breath. "What was that? I didn't catch that." "It's rainy day," he grumbled. "You must be a real ray of sunshine. And this is why I don't tell any pony my name," he snorted. "All right, boys, play nice. We're stuck with each other for quite a while." Sunny Spring said in that mother dealing with unruly children tone of voice as she fished a deck of cards out of her uniform pocket. The door behind them suddenly opened and Shining Armor walked in with a small sack on his back. Both guards jumped to attention. Captain Armor, sir, we were just at ease, Sergeant. I see you were setting up to play cards again. What's the game? Go fish. Well, how about instead we play a real stallions game and play poker instead? He said as he opened up the sack and pulled out a proper poker set, whilst simultaneously pulling up an extra chair with his telekinesis. At our dumbstruck looks he turned to me and said, "You saved my sister's life. The least I can do is make your stay here a little less boring." We looked each other in the eye, and the first sparks of grudging mutual respect were born. I gave him a nod and he gave me a slight smirk back. "Now then, the game is 5-card stud, aces are wild," he said as he shuffled the deck.